It's not uncommon to hear people say that there can't be a good film based on a video game. They might bring up some clever sounding points such as it being a completely different medium and that the structure of a game is inherently different to that of a film. I don't like these arguments as they always seem to ignore the more simple reasons for why these films tend to fail. This 2022 article from the Nerd Stash brings up some of the arguments that I don't like, as well as a suggestion for how it would still be possible to make a good video game adaptation. I will be using this article as a representative of the people who say these kinds of things and shall argue against it. To help with this, I'm going to be splitting the adaptations into three categories: those mostly based on stories, those mostly based on characters, and those which take place in the same timeline as the games, with mostly brand new stories and characters. To give an example for each, Uncharted loosely follows the events of A Thief's End, Hitman loosely uses the character of 47, and Assassin's Creed takes place in the same universe as the games, but tells a whole new story with new characters. I should also quickly summarise the article. It says that games are different from films because they require the player to directly engage with the story, which helps to immerse the audience and make them care more about the protagonist's actions. Making a film based on the game would be taking a step back in quality due to this, and to quote a blog post that makes the same point, making a film version of a game like Breath of the Wild would be like trying to capture Forrest Gump through the medium of music or with a painting. It also says that the quality of a film depends solely on the quality of its story, no matter how good the directing or music is. On the other hand, a game can be good from just having engaging gameplay. Even when they do try to have an interesting story, the pacing is completely different. Some games don't use a 3-act structure, and the story has to accommodate for people being stuck in one place for hours. Ignoring the fact that being stuck in one place for hours isn't normally due to a deliberate choice made by developers, and that it would still break the pacing of a story, it is true that games tend to have a much slower pace than films, which could make adapting them trickier. The article also brings up some points on how films based on games could potentially be good, but that related more to the third category, which I want to talk about later. Let's start with those based on stories. For this, I watched Uncharted, Tomb Raider, and The Last of Us, as well as playing the games they were based on. I also should acknowledge that I know that The Last of Us was a series and not a film, but I'm including it anyway. Something in common with all of these is that they make changes to the stories of varying scale. I think that The Last of Us does this well as it seems to be addressing the change in the medium. One change they made to the infected is that they now respond from a wide area when someone disturbs some spores or something. While watching the characters navigate slowly and carefully around the areas affected by this was suspenseful and interesting to watch, it would have probably been a pain in the arse to design a level around. They also removed many of the action sequences. This has a similar effect, though it worked the other way around. While playing through many action sequences can be fun, watching them can get old quickly. It also added more weight to the remaining action scenes and added more focus to the characters. There were other changes made, but they mostly stuck to making the pacing work better for the medium. Importantly, it shows that actual thought was put into these changes. On the other hand, Uncharted and Tomb Raider's changes felt a little bit confused and haphazard. Though they both change much more than The Last of Us did, Uncharted probably changes the most. Though the MacGuffin is clearly based on the one in The Thief's End, the trials and justifications of the characters are completely different. Other than the Drake brothers, Sully and Chloe, all the characters are completely new. This brings me to my biggest problem with the film. Sam Drake shouldn't have been included at all if he wasn't going to feature heavily in the plot. In the games, Sam is only introduced in the fourth mainline entry. As a weird coincidence, this happens to be the first game when his existence is integral to the plot. Even if the character had existed when the other games came out, it wouldn't have made sense to have a scene dedicated to him in a game where he's barely a part of it. I would argue that the reasons why the game has the flashback sequences are to explain his absence from the other games, why Nathan hasn't brought him up until now, and his history with Nathan and how he personally helped to shape his character. None of this is necessary if the film you're making is the first in the franchise. I agree with the writers that it wouldn't have been a good idea to start by introducing the main character to his long-lost brother, and I also agree that it's probably a good idea to start referencing his existence as early as possible. But a whole scene? You could just have Nathan reference him at some point. It would have made loads more sense if you implied that he died at some point and that Nathan never fully got over his death. In the film, the reveal that Sam died at some point and that some characters knew about him doesn't mean anything, as he's not yet an important character to the audience. It seems as though they just wanted to copy the structure of the opening to the fourth game with a bit of action from the middle of the story, a flashback showing Nathan and Sam, and then show where Nathan is before everything goes down. They could have cut this scene completely, and the only effect it would have had would have been that the pacing would be better. Tomb Raider is a bit different to Uncharted, in that it closely follows a specific story instead of being clumsily stitched together from memorable parts of a franchise. The film takes place on the same island with the same dead queen, surrounded by a supernatural mythology. Many of the set pieces are the same, and when they are changed, they are replaced by something that generally tries to hit the same story beats or do something similar. Some of the changes make sense. I can understand them trimming down the characters to help with the runtime, especially if they wanted to add so much stuff in the UK, and I can also understand why they might have wanted to get rid of the bits with the Stormguard, also for the runtime. Something I'm less sure about is them changing the ending. Throughout the film, it seems like it's setting up that it's going to stick with the Weather Curse ending. Someone says about how it's tricky to get to the island, but even trickier to leave.
Almost impossible to get here. Even harder to leave.
Her dad says that Himiko won't let him leave.
But I realized she'd never let me leave.
There's a big storm that comes out of nowhere towards the beginning, and there's the crash plane. I understand that these don't really contradict the ending of the film, and I understand that they might have wanted to subvert the expectations of the people who already knew the story of the game, but I feel like they keep too much from the original story for the new ending to work. In the game, Matthias believes that Himiko will personally let him off the island if he brings her a new person to inhabit. In the film, Matthias is a stupid coward who will do anything to get off the island other than try to take the helicopter like the heroes do at the end of the film. I think this makes him a much less interesting character. Speaking of characters being much less interesting, film Lara doesn't really make any decisions for herself. A big part of the original story is that she's forced to take responsibility and do things she really doesn't want to because she's the only person who can do them. In the film, the only big decision she makes is to go to Yamatai, and the only reason she does that is because she's following what her dad did. I guess she also decides to go back to stop the baddies at the end, but that's only after she had led them to the place. It feels more like she's trying to unfuck up the situation than making an active decision. When she gets enslaved by Trinity, she doesn't fight it, and only escapes after the other characters start to revolt. Her dad's the one who blows up the corpse at the end, and her dad's the one who heals her injury after she's impaled. That brings me to another change I didn't like. I can understand why they decided to make it a 12 because of marketing and stuff, however that doesn't mean I have to like it. The game equivalent of her being impaled by a bit of wood and her dad fixing it is her falling onto an old rusty bit of metal, repeatedly wading through corpses and shite, repeatedly being twatted by stuff, and then cauterizing herself with an arrow and a lighter. This change takes away from the theme of taking responsibility. Another issue with them toning down the violence is with her first kill. In the game, she shoots someone point blank in the face, resulting in blood and brains going everywhere. In the film, she drowns someone in a puddle. People like to complain that she gets over this too quickly in the game, but really she's too busy doing other things like trying not to die. However, in the film, she gets over it because she gets distracted by seeing her dad and doesn't seem to care after taking a cheeky nap. Maybe I just don't like subtlety, but I really think that something is lost when the first kill becomes so much less visceral. Like with Sam in Uncharted, Anna only feels like she's there because she's in one of the games and they didn't know what to do with her. Why should I care that she turns out to be a baddie? If you're adapting a story, you can't blame its medium if every change you make makes the story less interesting. I think the main reason for why this film annoys me so much is because I honestly can't think of an easier game to adapt into a film, and they still managed to fuck it all up. With both this and Uncharted, none of the issues come from the fact that they're based on games. At best, you could say that some of the issues are from the writers not being bothered to make appropriate changes and lazily including recognisable things without thinking about how they fit into the story.
Hey, got the door open.
The next film I watched for this was Hitman Agent 47. This fits into the category of films mostly based on characters and not a story. To be completely honest, I really enjoyed this film, probably more than it deserved. It was really stupid and nothing like the games, but it was a lot of fun. I don't really have much to say about it, other than the fact that it's so blatantly different from the games that you can't blame the fact that it was based on a game if you didn't like it for some unfathomable reason. The last film I watched for this was the 2016 Assassin's Creed, which fits into the category of films telling a new story in an established franchise. To quote from the article, the only way to make a good film based on a video game is to tell a story in the universe of a game that wasn't told before. Other than the only way bit, I don't think it's wrong to think that this approach would be easier. The film could tell whatever story it wanted, and no effort would be needed to make the pacing work for the new medium. Unfortunately, this supposedly easier process didn't help Assassin's Creed. The biggest problem I had with this film was its pacing. The whole of the beginning felt completely rushed while the rest dragged on so much that I almost gave up with it. There's multiple openings and the exposition gets explained multiple times throughout the film. It opens with a text scroll, followed by the olden days people doing their ritual thing, followed by the main fella playing on a bike, followed by main fella finding his mum being killed, followed by main fella running away from the baddies, followed by main fella, now a grown up, being on death row, followed by him supposedly being killed. This all happens within the first 13-ish minutes of the film. The rest is mostly people standing around saying the most offensively uncompelling stuff possible and repeating stuff they've said before. I honestly think that the opening of the film should be seen as an achievement. How do you manage to make watching a character wait to be executed not interesting? He just seems bored most of the time. This could have been interesting if they'd kept with it and had it be that he just wanted to die, and if they'd shown him being annoyed that he'd survived after, but they don't do that. Instead, they have him start to look scared as he's just about to die. What's wrong with picking a path and sticking to it? Also, just before that, why not show more of him running away from the baddies as a child? That could have been interesting. If they'd got rid of the even earlier bits with the exposition, watching a child get away from baddies that neither we or the characters know anything about could have been good. To be honest, I don't really know what I'm talking about, and I could be completely wrong with each individual criticism of each individual adaptation. However, even if that is the case, I still think it's important to note that these films had problems which were completely unrelated to what they were based on. It is true that films based on video games tend to be a bit shite, but assuming that this is an inevitability misses out on the more interesting discussions on why these films are bad and why this trend might exist. It gives them an easy pass and excuses lazy writing and a seeming lack of care. When a bad film is based on a book, no one just gives it a pass because it was based on a book, despite the structure also needing a massive overhaul. Anyway, that's about it. Thanks for watching.